And welcome to the data-driven case for fair chance hiring, where we'll be sharing insights on how formerly justice-involved frontline employees experience advancement in the workplace and what that has to do with fair chance hiring, based on the study Bridging the Advancement Gap, What Frontline Employees Want and What Employers Think They Want, published by Cara and McKinsey in July. My name is Sarah Wasserteil, and I serve as Managing Director of Expansion and Integration at Cara and was a co-author of the report. I want to share just a few logistics before we dive in. We know many of you may have questions, so feel free to add what you're most curious to learn about in the chat or the comment box. We also encourage you to put questions in the comment box throughout this session. We will wait to the very end of the presentation to respond to all questions, so do be sure to stick around to get your questions answered. We also want to make sure we are learning from you, so we'll put some prompts in the comment section as we go throughout, so do keep your eyes peeled there. Now to begin, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Cara Collective, we are a 30-year-old national workforce development organization. Each year, we move people into roughly 1,000 jobs at 70% same firm 1-year retention rate, which is about 20 points higher than the national average. The job seekers we serve have often fallen into misfortune, misstep, or injustice, which has resulted in roughly 50% having a criminal record, as well as nearly 40% who haven't completed high school. Additionally, only 38% have stable housing when they join Cara, and roughly 70% have it when they leave. Despite the obstacles that often leave these talented individuals locked out of the workplace, we work with them to secure jobs in industries spanning healthcare, food, hospitality, financial services, professional services, property management, and others. And now, as I mentioned in up top, our data on justice-involved employers was based on a larger study on frontline worker mobility. The reason we thought this type of research was critically important was because over time, we had noticed that upward mobility was pretty poorly defined. And when it was defined, not only was it often defined just by the employers themselves, but pathways were oftentimes overly simple or overly complex, and didn't necessarily reflect frontline workers' desires or needs. As a result, we saw millions of frontline workers unaware of how to move up and were being left behind from advancement opportunities. So we partnered with McKinsey to launch this study to better understand what frontline workers cared about and what facilitated their success based on the experience of frontline workers themselves. Here's a little bit about what this study looked like. First, we conducted qualitative and quantitative research with more than 2,100 frontline employees and more than 300 employers across industries like healthcare, hospitality, manufacturing, professional and financial services, and retail. In it, we defined frontline workers as those making less than $22 an hour. We also made sure to include populations like those who'd been skilled through alternative routes or didn't have a 4-year degree, but rather gained their skills in the workplace, and also included nearly 300 employees that had been impacted by the criminal justice system, because we know that they have historically experienced underinvestment in the workplace and really wanted to understand what we could learn to facilitate their increased hiring and advancement. If we want to take just a quick double click on those who have been justice impacted, roughly 30% were Black or Latinx, which roughly reflects the frontline worker population more broadly. About 60% of our survey respondents were women, and just over 50% of respondents were between the ages of 25 and 44 years old. We also saw roughly equal representation across the country among urban, suburban, and rural environments. So through this research, we sought to answer a few primary questions, 3 namely. So number 1, first we wanted to learn, what do frontline workers prioritize when they think about advancement, and how does that differ from what their employers think they prioritize? The second question we sought to answer was, when frontline workers are advancing, what's happening? When they are not advancing, what's missing? And lastly, we wanted to make this as tactical as possible, so we wanted to ask ourselves, what can employers do to strengthen upward mobility for frontline workers to stem the Great Resignation? And of course, this presentation is focused on justice-impacted individuals. So first, here is what we learned. When we looked at what frontline workers prioritize when they think about advancement and looked at it through that lens of that formerly justice-involved population, Here's what we saw. Far and away, what frontline workers cared most about was being able to use or grow their skill set, pay, having more responsibility, and having a supportive manager. While a lot of these trends were true across frontline workers more broadly, there were a few places where we saw differences. For example, while all frontline workers placed job growth as their highest advancement priority, justice-involved employees placed even greater value on it, with 80% ranking it as their top priority when they think about advancement. Also, while other populations above the age of 24 didn't rank a higher job title as a high priority, justice-impacted frontline workers placed a greater value on titles as well, possibly due to the fact that they face increased challenges obtaining employment and advancing in those industries. But the differences didn't stop there. While formerly justice-involved individuals generally mirrored the frontline worker population more broadly for their top priorities, there were others that they didn't value as much when we dug a little bit deeper. For example, things that ranked lower than other frontline employees included things like vacation and sick time, flexible schedules, family support benefits like parental leave, and the presence of role models. Again, it's not that they didn't say these were not important. What we take from the research is that this is likely due to the fact that because they have fewer opportunities for employment more broadly, they prioritize qualities that will promote their continued growth and income potential, and those were the ones they continued to focus on, and those were the priorities that consistently rose to the top. Now, when we took this data, it was right around April of 2022, and so we were able to look right around the time that the Great Resignation was taking off, and we were also able to look back to understand their priorities before COVID and after COVID. And here's what we saw when we looked at what had shifted after the pandemic. So, for example, things like pay, growth, and learning opportunities became even more important to justice-impacted workers compared to other frontline employees after the pandemic. Whereas things like flexibility, which we have data that shows tends to be more prioritized among folks at the manager level and above, they just didn't increase as much as other populations, likely due to some of the data we talked about above. Finally, while these things came out loud and clear with our justice-impacted frontline workers, what employers thought frontline workers prioritized didn't totally hit the mark. For example, employers tended to overvalue things like recognition while undervaluing things like pay and having an aligned skill set. So once we better understood what frontline workers cared about, we started looking at what was happening when they were successful versus what was happening when they weren't successful to inform a bit of a way forward. First, we found that while 70% of frontline workers had applied for an advancement opportunity, only 40% got an incremental raise or responsibility, and only 25% got a promotion. When we saw that, we thought, I wonder if we could focus on that 25% to see if there were any themes on what was helping to facilitate their growth and advancement. And here's what we found. In addition to having a clear understanding of how to move ahead, those who have been promoted reported strong levels of support from their managers, including having 23% more frequent manager-led advancement conversations and 15% more positive feedback conversations with their managers. What's especially critical about these data points is that it shows that when advancement conversations happened, they were, number one, frequent, and number two, they were manager-led, showing that they had a manager that was invested in them. This seemed to bear out with the data around positive manager feedback as well. We so often hear from our frontline workers that either they never hear from their managers, or when they do hear from their managers, it's because they've done something wrong. So we see that in addition to justice-impacted workers having the will and skill, having a supportive manager seemed to be the difference between those who got ahead and those who did not. After we looked at what was happening when justice-impacted workers were getting ahead, we decided to look at the converse. So what was missing from the rest who were struggling to move up the ladder? Here's what we found. So first, not surprisingly, a high number of individuals reported that they were unaware how to get ahead within their firms. That was 65%. And this trend was not limited to justice-impacted employees. It was consistent across all frontline employees that we surveyed. Why was this? First, while employers report having many formal structures to communicate how to advance, less than 20% of frontline employees reported hearing about advancement conversations through the job description, human resources, or their manager. I'm going to say that again. Less than 20% of frontline employees reported hearing about advancement opportunities through formal mechanisms like the job description, human resources, or their manager. When they did hear about advancement, it tended to be through more informal channels. So, for example, hearing about a specific role from a colleague. And even that happened at a lower frequency than employers assumed. Unfortunately, the disconnect did not stop there. So, employers regularly overestimated the awareness of career paths, the frequency at which advancement conversations were happening, and what training employees were aware of. And this hurt different populations totally differently. Namely, women, younger workers, and those who'd been skilled through alternative routes were less likely to be aware of advancement opportunities than other populations. That said, we did see some opportunities for optimism as well. In fact, those who had been impacted by the criminal justice system or who had experienced homelessness demonstrated high motivation despite the fact that they'd historically been underinvested in the workplace. For example, they were more likely to spend time upskilling by 14 percentage points, demonstrating their drive and commitment to get ahead. Here's what else we found when we double-clicked on justice-involved frontline employees. First, we saw a 10-point higher rate of learning from coworkers, obtaining certifications, and doing the job before getting promoted compared to all other frontline workers. We also saw higher rates of utilizing on-the-job mentoring or shadowing opportunities or utilizing written career paths, demonstrating high motivation among formerly justice-involved frontline employees that will bear out in the results that we'll share on the next slide. That said, as you might suspect, there were some obstacles getting in their way as well. For example, we saw higher rates of stressful home lives or perceptions that they could not get ahead compared to their peers who are also frontline employees. We also saw a higher perception that they didn't have the skills to work from home in a post-COVID world, where more work from home positions are available the higher you rise in a firm. As firms that embrace fair chance hiring consider their workforce offering stability and support that can help people with stressful home lives, which we know are not limited to those with justice involvement, but could impact them disproportionately, can see a greater return. We also know that since formerly justice impacted frontline employees have a repeated track record of taking advantage of upskilling, that when employers give them the opportunity to train to get ahead, they are more likely to take them. So you might be wondering how this all plays out. Over the last 15 minutes or so, I've talked a bit about what justice-involved frontline employees prioritize, what happens when they're advancing, and what's getting in their way when they're not. So you might ask, well, what does the data say and how do they fare when it comes to advancement? And this is what we found, and it was the finding in the study that I found most important. It is that justice-impacted workers apply for and succeed in receiving advancement opportunities more than any other group survey. That means they were more likely to apply for and succeed in getting a promotion, a raise, more responsibility, or a new role over any other population cut by race, gender, and age. It's also why a study about frontline worker mobility and advancement priorities can be instructive when we think about what talent pipelines we consider in our workplaces. Because the data shows that when people who've been involved with the criminal justice system get hired, they have the will and grit to stay and grow in their firms. So where do we go from here? At the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned that the genesis of the study was predicated on the fact that we oftentimes don't know what frontline workers prioritize, mostly because we've never asked. So when we looked at what employers should do next, we looked both at what frontline workers said they prioritized, as well as what has worked when they have been able to move ahead. We've boiled these down to 5 high-level categories with specific recommendations under each. First, communicate advancement pathways clearly and frequently. This includes sharing advancement pathways and different employee experiences for advancement as early as the job description. In fact, only 20% of frontline employees, justice involved frontline employees, said that they learned about advancement opportunities in the job description. And yet 70% said this was a critical to include in the job description so that they could really evaluate if an opportunity was right for them. Second, ensure that workers get structured information about how to advance during their onboarding and get exposure to people who have advanced from their role within the first 30 days and again within the first 90 days. Saying this once, which is often what we see in the workplace, oftentimes is not enough. The more you can expose frontline employees and justice impacted employees to others who have advanced and bring it up regularly, the more that they know that it is something that you and your firm prioritize. Lastly, under that first bucket, just ensure that advancement conversations are baked into the regular professional development conversations with managers, and this should start from the very top. The second recommendation is providing opportunities that leverage employee skills. If you remember the top 5 priorities for justice impacted employees, we learned that they prioritize the opportunity for growth, an aligned skill set, and learning opportunities. And like all other employees, we also know that people like to do things they are interested in and are good at. For frontline employees, even when they're in roles that might be a little bit more rote or mechanical, including things like on-the-job stretch assignments or cross-training with different teams can help them stay engaged and grow into higher value roles. It can also include lateral moves, which has been shown by MIT to boost employee retention by 250%. Finally, investing in paid training. We know, based on the data from this report, that justice impacted workers will utilize upskilling training if offered, and that when they're afforded the opportunity to take advantage of it. If you are providing training and your employees aren't utilizing it, explore why not. It could be because they aren't aware, but it could also be because they are not able to attend or it doesn't appeal to their interests. Bucket 3, equip managers to support and grow their teams. This includes equipping managers to be people managers before they start or early on their career journey as a manager, including things like trauma-informed care and how to support frontline employees who may be more incentivized by production-oriented metrics. Speaking of metrics, this also include metrics in their performance reviews that can help incentivize behavior to not just produce, but that can incentivize managers to support their teams. And lastly, consistently tracking who is moving up can help leadership reward managers who are advancing frontline talent, learn from them, and provide direction for those who might need help. Fourth, this one might sound obvious, but prioritize frontline employee preferences when deciding incentives. Outside of growth opportunities, the number 2 priority for justice impacted and frontline employees more broadly was compensation. In fact, $1 more of compensation rose to the top more than almost any other benefit you could provide, whether it was flexibility, whether it was benefits and others. So listening to frontline employees and what they care about can help ensure that you're providing advancement opportunities that are in line with their priorities and their needs to get ahead. And lastly, invest in motivated talent pools who are eager to learn and grow. We know that when people who've been justice impacted apply, they are more likely to be successful. Using experience in lieu of degrees and reassessing those criminal background policies when possible can be sure you are opening up those motivated talent pools who've demonstrated that they are eager to advance and are successful when they do so. Now, when you listen to some of those recommendations, you might have thought that these are just good practices for any employees, not just for frontline employees or justice-involved frontline employees at that. And frankly, we agree. The difference is just that we don't often see these practices applied to frontline workers as frequently because they're often seen as high turnover roles versus motivated talent pools to invest in. Millions of formerly justice-involved frontline employees are eager to advance, yet for so long we haven't thought to ask what's most important to them. Now that we know, we have the opportunity to help them achieve their goals and ours. We've put a link in the comments to the full study for how you can learn about more ways to hire and support second chance hires in your firm. Now I'm going to take questions from the chat. All right. It looks like we haven't gotten any questions, so we are going to end this a little bit early. But I wanted to thank everyone who was able to join us live today and thank others who are able to join us later. We appreciate this. If you want links to the deck or any of the data, please let us know. We would be happy to send it to you. Also, feel free to share this webinar. It is live and accessible through the link that you accessed it through today. Thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.